Millionaire discovers his school crush is his new personal assistant. What happens next is beyond imagination. The boardroom air suddenly felt electric. Alex Conway's pen froze mid-signature when the door opened and she walked in. Emma Parker. His high school crush now stood before him, poised and professional, completely unaware of how his world had just tilted on its axis. Their eyes met across the polished mahogany table, and his chest tightened with a rush of emotions he thought he'd buried years ago. Did she recognize him? For a breathtaking moment, her composed expression wavered, a flicker of something crossing her features before her professional mask slipped back into place. Alex's mind raced between disbelief, elation, and a creeping dread. How could he possibly focus on quarterly projections when the girl who once occupied the margins of his notebook was now being introduced as his new personal assistant? He rose from his chair, extended his hand, and wondered if she could feel the slight tremor in his fingers. "Welcome to Conway Enterprises, Ms. Parker," he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. In the fleeting second before she took his hand, Alex caught a glimpse of the silver band on her finger, and his momentary euphoria crashed into an unexpected wall of disappointment. "Thank you, Mr. Conway. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Her voice flowed like warm honey, professional yet with an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite place. Did she truly not remember him? The way she said, "finally," left him wondering if there was more behind those carefully chosen words. Before we dive deep into this heartfelt story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's free, as your support helps us create more meaningful stories for you. Enjoy the story. Alex motioned toward the chair next to his. "Please, join us. We were just discussing the Henderson merger." His words sounded hollow in his ears, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. 10 years since high school, and here she was, more beautiful than his memory had preserved. The shy girl with braces and a nervous laugh had transformed into a woman of quiet confidence, her chestnut hair now falling in soft waves around a face that had only grown more captivating with maturity. Emma slid gracefully into the chair, opening her leather portfolio with efficient movements. The scent of her perfume, was it still vanilla after all these years? Drifted toward him, triggering a cascade of memories that threatened to drown the present moment. How many times had he rehearsed asking her to prom? How many opportunities had slipped through his fingers because he'd been too afraid of rejection? "Mr. Conway." A voice pierced his reverie. David, his CFO, was staring at him expectantly, along with the rest of the board. Heat crept up Alex's neck. How long had he been lost in the past? "Yes, of course, the Henderson numbers," he said, forcing his attention back to the spreadsheets before him. But his mind refused to process the figures that once came so easily to him. Instead, he found himself acutely aware of Emma's presence beside him, the soft sound of her breathing, the way she leaned forward with interest, the slight furrow between her brows as she concentrated on the presentation. The meeting dragged on, each minute an exercise in self-control. When it finally ended, Emma gathered her notes with practiced efficiency. "I'll draft the summary report and have it on your desk by this afternoon, Mr. Conway," she said, her professionalism unwavering. "Alex," he corrected, the word escaping before he could consider its implications. "Please, call me Alex." Something flickered again behind her eyes. Recognition. Hesitation. "Of course." "Alex," she replied, testing the familiarity of his name on her tongue. The boardroom emptied, leaving them in a silence that felt charged with unspoken questions. Alex couldn't help himself. "Have we met before, Emma?" he asked, his heart hammering against his ribs like a prisoner desperate for freedom. Emma paused, her fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around her portfolio. "Westlake High, class of 2014, she said simply, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You sat behind me in AP Chemistry for a whole year, never said a word to me." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. She remembered. All this time she knew exactly who he was. "You remember," he breathed, the words hanging between them like a confession. "Hard to forget the quarterback who became a millionaire," she replied, her tone light but her eyes revealing nothing of her true thoughts. "Your face has been on the business section of the newspaper more than a few times." Was that all it was? His media presence rather than their shared past? Disappointment settled in his stomach like a heavy stone. "I didn't think you'd notice someone like me back then," he admitted, the honesty surprising even himself. Emma's professional veneer cracked just enough for genuine surprise to show through. "Someone like you? The Alex Conway? Most popular boy in school, athletic scholarship, voted most likely to succeed?" She laughed softly, the sound sending ripples of warmth through his chest. "I think you have our roles reversed." Before he could respond, her phone chimed. Emma glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted subtly. A tightening around her eyes, a slight downturn of her lips. "I should get started on that report," she said, her professional mask sliding firmly back into place. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Con? Alex?" The moment was slipping away. Alex scrambled for a reason to keep her there to extend this unexpected reconnection. "Actually, I'd like to get your input on the Harrison file. Perhaps over lunch." The invitation hung in the air between them, freighted with more meaning than a simple business discussion warranted. Emma hesitated, her eyes darting briefly to the ring on her finger. "I think it would be more appropriate to discuss it here, in the office," she said carefully, each word measured. Of course, the ring. Whoever he was a reminder that Alex had waited too long, 10 years too long. "You're right," he conceded, his disappointment masked behind a professional smile. "My office at 2, then?" She nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. 2:00, I'll be there." As Emma walked away, Alex remained rooted to the spot, watching her retreat. The universe had given him a second chance at something he'd been too cowardly to pursue as a teenager. But the silver band on her finger mocked his newfound courage. He was too late. Or was he? The way she'd reacted to her phone, the slight hesitation when discussing the ring, there was more to Emma Parker's story than a simple engagement. And he had every intention of finding out what it was. Days turned into weeks, and Alex found himself inventing reasons to call Emma into his office. A report that needed discussion. A client meeting that required her presence. A business trip that absolutely couldn't be delegated to anyone else. Each encounter was both heaven and torture, her proximity setting his nerves alight while her professional distance kept him firmly at arm's length. His office had become a stage for their daily dance of near-missed connections. This morning, she placed his coffee on the desk, black with 1 sugar, exactly how he liked it though he never told her, and he couldn't help but notice her ring was missing. "No ring today?" The question tumbled out before he could stop himself. Immediately, he regretted it. Emma's hand jerked slightly, her fingers instinctively moving to the empty space on her left hand. "It needs cleaning," she said, the explanation too quick, too rehearsed. Her eyes didn't meet his, focusing instead on organizing the folders she'd brought in. "The Anderson report you asked for, and the Jacobson contracts need your signature by noon." Alex nodded, accepting her deflection even as curiosity burned through him. "Thank you, Emma." He took the folders, their fingers brushing momentarily. The brief contact sent electricity coursing up his arm. Did she feel it too? Her sharp intake of breath suggested she might have, but her face betrayed nothing. Later that afternoon, Alex stared at the same page of financial projections he'd been trying to read for the past hour. The numbers blurred before his eyes, his mind stubbornly returning to the empty space on Emma's finger. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed the ring's absence. In fact, there seemed to be a pattern. Business lunches, meetings with important clients. Whenever Richard called, He'd overheard the name once, spoken in hushed, tense tones. A knock at his door jolted him from his thoughts. Emma entered carrying another stack of files. "The quarterly reports you requested," she said, placing them on his desk. This time, the ring was back, catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through his office windows. But something was different. She kept touching it, twisting it, as if it were a foreign object she couldn't get used to. "Is everything all right, Emma?" he asked, gentler than he intended. Her professional smile faltered for just a second. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be? You seem—" He searched for the right word. "Distracted." Emma straightened, her defenses visibly rising. "I assure you, my personal life isn't affecting my work performance." "That's not what I meant." Alex stood, moving around his desk to face her directly. Without the barrier between them, he could see the faint shadows beneath her eyes, skillfully concealed with makeup but visible to someone looking as closely as he was. "I'm asking as someone who cares about you, wants to know you, has never forgotten you, as a friend." "Is that what we are?" Emma asked, her voice soft but challenging. "Friends." The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken implications. Before Alex could respond, his phone rang, the board's emergency line. He reluctantly answered it, watching Emma use the interruption to slip quietly from his office. The call confirmed his fears. The Harrison deal, a merger he'd spent months orchestrating, was on the verge of collapse. The board wanted an emergency meeting. Now. But all he could think about was the look in Emma's eyes before she'd left. What had she meant? Was there a chance she felt this inexplicable pull between them too? The boardroom felt suffocating. Board members spoke in urgent tones about the millions they stood to lose, but Alex's mind kept wandering to Emma, sitting quietly in the corner taking notes. How had he missed her in high school? How had he let her slip away then? And how was he losing her now, when she was literally in the same room? "Alex!" His CFO's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Have you heard a word we've said? Harrison is walking away. We're talking about a loss of $50 million here." The board's attention focused on him, faces ranging from concern to outright displeasure. Even Emma was looking at him now, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal worry in her eyes. "I need some air," Alex muttered, pushing back from the table. He stalked out of the room, ignoring the stunned silence behind him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, loosening his tie that suddenly felt like a noose. "Alex." Emma's voice came softly from beside him. She'd followed him out. "The board is waiting." He turned to her, something breaking loose inside him. "I can't focus on Harrison when all I can think about is you." Emma stepped back as if his words had physically pushed her. I don't. I know. You're engaged. It's inappropriate. I'm your boss." The words rushed out like water from a broken dam. "But I can't help it, Emma. Seeing you again after all these years. It's like the universe is giving me a second chance to fix the biggest regret of my life. Never telling you how I felt in high school." Emma's eyes widened, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. For a breathtaking moment, Alex thought she might confess to feeling the same. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and something like fear flickered across her features. "I have to take this," she whispered, already backing away. "Emma." "Please go back to the meeting," she said, her voice strained. "They need you. The company needs you." She turned away, answering the phone with a forced brightness that didn't match the tension in her shoulders. "Hi, Richard." "Yes, I'm still at work." Alex watched her retreat down the hallway, her voice fading as she rounded the corner. The name echoed in his mind. Richard, the invisible barrier between them, more insurmountable than the 10 years they'd spent apart. He returned to the boardroom where the crisis awaited. But even as he forced himself to address the Harrison problem, A new determination took root in his mind. He needed to understand who Richard was, and why the mere mention of his name could drain the color from Emma's face. As the meeting adjourned, the board chairman pulled him aside. "This isn't like you, Alex. You've never let anything distract you from business before." The older man's eyes were sharp with concern. "Whatever it is, deal with it, before you lose everything you've built." Alex nodded soberly, but as he watched Emma slip back into the room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand and her ring once again prominently displayed, he wondered if he hadn't already found something worth more than everything he'd built. The company charity gala should have been Alex's moment of triumph. After salvaging the Harrison deal through 3 sleepless nights and a last-minute flight to Chicago, he'd earned the right to celebrate. Instead, he found himself standing alone by the champagne fountain, scanning the crowded ballroom for a glimpse of chestnut hair and that green dress he'd overheard Emma describing to a colleague. Looking for someone. David, his CFO, appeared at his side with 2 glasses of champagne. He offered one to Alex, who accepted it with a distracted nod. "Just checking on the event. Emma organized it all." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, even to his own ears. David gave him a knowing look. "She did an amazing job. The board's impressed with her, almost as impressed as you are." Alex opened his mouth to object, then closed it. What was the point in denying what was becoming obvious to everyone around him? "Is it that noticeable?" "Only to those of us who've known you for years," David said, his tone gentler now. "Be careful, Alex. Office romances are complicated enough without adding your position into the mix, not to mention her engagement." The reminder stung like alcohol on an open wound. "I know that. Don't you think I know that?" Alex drained his champagne, the bubbles bitter on his tongue. "It doesn't matter anyway. She's made it clear that—" His words died as the crowd parted, revealing Emma across the room. The emerald dress hugged her figure before flowing to the floor like liquid jade, making her the singular point of color in a sea of black tuxedos. She was radiant, captivating, and she was not alone. A tall man with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes stood possessively at her side, his hand placed firmly at the small of her back. "That must be Richard," David murmured, following Alex's gaze. Alex felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. He'd pictured Richard countless times, but seeing him in the flesh, seeing his hand on Emma, made something primal twist inside him. "Excuse me," he muttered to David, already moving through the crowd toward them. As he approached, he caught snippets of their conversation. Richard's voice was smooth, cultured, but laced with an undercurrent that set Alex's teeth on edge. "Told you to stay close to me," Richard was saying, his fingers visibly tightening on Emma's waist. "Half these men have been staring at you all night." "It's my job to circulate, to make sure everything's running smoothly," Emma replied, her voice low but firm. "The board members expect—" "I don't care what they expect. You're my—" "Emma!" Alex interrupted, unable to stomach another second of watching her being controlled. "There you are. The Hendersons were asking about you. They wanted to thank you personally for arranging their seating near the stage." Emma's eyes met his, relief washing over her features before her professional mask clicked back into place. "Mr. Conway," she said formally, a subtle warning in her tone. "May I introduce my fiancé, Richard Blackwood? Richard, this is my boss, Alex Conway." Richard's grip on Emma tightened fractionally as he extended his other hand to Alex. "Conway, I've heard a lot about you." His smile was shark-like, all teeth and predatory assessment. "Emma speaks very highly of your company." The emphasis wasn't lost on Alex. He shook Richard's hand, matching the man's crushing grip with equal force. "All the credit tonight goes to Emma. She's invaluable to Conway Enterprises." He turned to her, softening his gaze. "The event is perfect, Emma. The foundation will be able to fund twice as many cancer treatments this year thanks to your efforts." At the mention of cancer treatments, Something flickered across Emma's face. Vulnerability quickly masked. Richard noticed, too, his expression hardening. "How fortunate that your company is so involved with cancer research," Richard said smoothly. "Emma's father has certainly benefited from advanced treatment options, hasn't he, darling?" Emma's smile froze in place. "Yes, he has. Excuse me, I need to check on the auction items before they're presented." She extracted herself from Richard's grip with practiced ease. "Alex, Mr. Conway, would you mind?" "Of course." Alex offered his arm, feeling Richard's glare burning into his back as he escorted Emma away. Once safely across the ballroom, Emma released a shaky breath. "Thank you." He gets protective in public. "Is that what we're calling it?" Alex asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Emma stopped walking, her eyes flashing with sudden anger. You don't understand the situation." "Then help me understand," he countered, lowering his voice as a couple waltzed past them. "Because from where I'm standing, he treats you like a possession, not a partner." Emma glanced back toward Richard, who was watching them intently from across the room while pretending to listen to a board member. "It's complicated," she whispered. "My father—" She stopped abruptly, drawing herself up. "I should get back to work." "Emma, wait." Alex gently caught her elbow. "Whatever it is, I can help. If it's money or medical bills or—" "Stop." Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "This isn't a fairy tale where the rich boss saves the damsel in distress. This is my life, Alex, my choices, my consequences." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Please respect that." She pulled away, disappearing into the crowd before he could respond. Alex stood frozen, her words ringing in his ears. He'd overstepped, offering help she hadn't asked for, assuming he understood a situation he only glimpsed from the outside. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. Alex played his part, smiling for donors, thanking sponsors, giving his speech about the foundation's work, but his eyes constantly returned to Emma, watching as she efficiently managed the event while maintaining a careful distance from both him and Richard. As the evening wound down, Alex found himself on the terrace, needing a moment away from the stifling politeness and champagne-fueled philanthropy. The night air was cool against his face, a welcome relief from the tension inside. Quite the party. Richard's voice came from behind him, falsely casual. "Emma certainly knows how to impress the right people." Alex turned slowly, measuring his response. "She's exceptional at her job." "Yes, she is." Richard stepped closer, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "And she's even better at being my fiancée. Something you'd do well to remember, Conway." "Is that a threat?" Alex asked, keeping his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. Richard laughed, the sound hollow and without humor. "Just a friendly reminder. Emma and I have an understanding. Her father's treatment at the Blackwood Medical Center is expensive, specialized, the kind of care that's hard to find elsewhere." His implication hung in the air between them. Emma understands where her priorities need to be. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Emma wasn't with Richard by choice. She was trapped by her father's medical needs. "You're using her father's illness to control her," Alex said, disgust coloring each word. Richard straightened his already immaculate tie. "I prefer to think of it as an arrangement that benefits everyone. Her father gets world-class treatment, Emma gets financial security, and I get a beautiful, accomplished wife who understands her role." He checked his watch. "Speaking of which, it's time I collected her. We have plans to discuss our wedding. Coming up soon, you know. Very soon." He strode away, leaving Alex gripping the terrace railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. The revelation of Emma's situation burned in his mind like acid. This wasn't just about his feelings for her anymore. This was about a woman being coerced and manipulated through her love for her father. Alex gazed back into the ballroom, watching as Richard intercepted Emma near the coat check. Even from a distance, he could see how she instinctively straightened her posture, adjusted her expression, becoming whatever version of herself Richard expected. In that moment, Alex made a decision. Board be damned. Harrison, deal, be damned. He would find a way to help Emma, not because he wanted her for himself, but because no one deserved to be trapped in a relationship built on fear and manipulation, especially not the woman who'd unknowingly held his heart since high school. The next morning, Alex arrived at the office earlier than usual. Sleep had evaded him, his mind replaying Richard's words like a haunting refrain. Emma understands where her priorities need to be. The casual cruelty of it, the naked manipulation. It churned in his stomach until he'd given up on rest entirely. He paced his office, watching dawn break over the city skyline. The question wasn't whether to help Emma, but how. Richard's control extended beyond simple financial leverage. There was something more insidious in his confidence, in his casual mention of Emma's father's treatment being hard to find elsewhere. It reeked of broader influence, of connections that could make problems disappear, or create them. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Emma stood in the doorway, surprise registering on her face at finding him already there. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, poorly concealed beneath makeup applied with less care than usual. Had she slept as badly as he had? "You're early," she said, clutching a stack of folders to her chest like armor. "So are you," he replied, taking in the slight tremble in her hands, the way she leaned against the doorframe as if needing its support. She straightened immediately under his scrutiny. "The quarterly reports. You asked for them first thing." Alex nodded, gesturing for her to enter. She placed the folders on his desk and turned to leave, her movements quick, almost desperate to escape his presence. "Emma, wait." The words halted her retreat, though she didn't turn back to face him. "Are you all right?" A humorless laugh escaped her. "Is that concern from my boss, or from Alex Conway, high school quarterback with a decade-delayed crush?" The bitter edge in her voice cut through him. This wasn't the composed Emma he'd come to know over the past weeks. Something had changed, or broken. "It's concern from someone who cares about you," he said quietly. "Someone who saw how Richard treated you last night." Emma's shoulders stiffened. "You don't know anything about my relationship." "I know enough." Alex moved around his desk, closing the distance between them but careful not to crowd her. "I know he's using your father's medical treatment to control you. I know you're afraid of what he might do if you try to leave." Emma whirled to face him, color draining from her face. "Who told you that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, fear replacing bitterness in an instant. "Richard made it pretty clear on the terrace last night. He practically bragged about your arrangement." Alex fought to keep his voice level, to contain the anger that threatened to boil over. "Emma, whatever hold he has over you, I can help. Conway Enterprises has connections with the best cancer treatment centers in the country. We could arrange for your father's care, make sure he gets everything he needs without Richard's involvement." For a moment, something like hope flickered across Emma's features, so brief he almost missed it. Then her expression shuddered, walls slamming into place. "And in exchange—" "What would you expect from me, Alex?" The question landed like a slap. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." He stepped back, giving her more space. "This isn't about what I want or how I feel about you. This is about helping someone escape a manipulative, controlling relationship." Emma's laugh was hollow, echoing in the quiet office. So noble, so selfless. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And completely naive. You think Richard would just let us walk away because you offered to pay my father's medical bills? You think his influence stops at money?" She moved to the window, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Richard has connections at every major hospital in the state. Doctors who owe him favors, administrators he's donated to, former classmates from medical school. Each word emerged more strained than the last. He told me once when I threatened to leave that he could make sure my father's case became complicated overnight, that no other facility would accept such a high-risk patient. Horror washed over Alex as the full extent of Richard's manipulation came into focus. This wasn't just financial control. It was the threat of medical sabotage, of using his professional connections to endanger a sick man's life. "He can't do that," Alex said, though doubt crept into his voice. "There are laws, ethics boards." "And who would prove it?" Emma turned to him, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Who would believe that the respected doctor, Blackwood, chief of oncology and philanthropist, would stoop to threatening a patient's care? By the time anyone investigated, my father could be—" Her voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. Alex crossed the room in 3 strides, instinct driving him to comfort her. Emma stepped back, holding up a hand to keep him at a distance. "Don't," she warned, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't make this harder than it already is. Emma, please, let me help. Not because I want anything from you, but because it's the right thing to do." Alex ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. "We could get your father out of state, somewhere beyond Richard's reach. I have connections, too, people who owe me favors. And drag my dying father across the country? Disrupt the only treatment that's been working?" Emma shook her head, wiping tears from her cheeks with angry swipes. "You don't understand what you're asking. My father has 6 months, maybe a year with this treatment. Richard made sure I knew exactly what would happen if I tried to leave, how quickly my father's condition would deteriorate without the precise protocol he's receiving now." She moved toward the door, composing herself with visible effort. "I made this choice, Alex. Eyes open. I knew what Richard was when I agreed to marry him. I knew the cost, and I decided my father's life was worth it." Her voice strengthened with each word. "So please, stop looking at me like I'm some victim to be rescued. Stop creating fantasies in your head about us. There is no us. There never was, not in high school, and certainly not now." Each word struck like a physical blow. Alex stood motionless, watching as Emma rebuilt her walls brick by brick, sealing herself away from him. "I'd like to request a transfer to another department," she said formally, professional mask firmly back in place despite the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. "I believe it would be best for both of us." "Emma?" "Please, Alex." For a moment her composure cracked. "If you truly care about me at all, you'll respect my decision. This is the only way I can protect my father, the only way I can do my job without complications." The unspoken truth hung between them. Without the complication of feelings neither of them could afford to acknowledge, without the temptation of a different life, a different choice that remained painfully out of reach. Alex wanted to argue, to find a solution she couldn't see, but the raw pain in her eyes stopped him. Who was he to tell her what risks she should take with her father's life? Who was he to insist he knew better than she did about her own situation? "If that's what you want," he said finally, each word dragged unwillingly from his throat. "It's what I need." Emma straightened her shoulders, the last of her tears drying on her cheeks. "I'll speak with HR today. In the meantime, I've organized all current projects for a smooth transition." Ever efficient, even in her pain. Alex watched helplessly as she turned to leave, taking with her any hope he'd built of a future together. "I'm sorry," he said to her, retreating back. "Not for wanting to help, but for making it harder for you. That was never my intention." Emma paused in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame so tightly her knuckles turned white. For a heartbeat, he thought she might turn back, might accept the help he so desperately wanted to give. Then her shoulders squared with resolve. "Goodbye, Alex," she said softly, and walked away. Alex stood alone in his office, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the space Emma had left empty. He'd lost her. Again. Only this time the stakes were infinitely higher than a missed chance at a high school romance. This time, a man's life hung in the balance, and Emma had made it clear which choice she had to make. But as he sank into his chair, staring at the folders she'd brought him, her last act as his assistant, Alex knew he couldn't accept her decision as final. Not when she was sacrificing her freedom, her happiness, her future, to a man who saw her as nothing more than a possession. Not when there had to be another way, a solution she couldn't see through the fear and manipulation Richard had wrapped around her. He just needed to find it without making her situation worse, without putting her father at risk, without losing her trust entirely. The board meeting notification popped up on his computer screen. Back to business. Back to the world of mergers and acquisitions and profit margins. But as Alex gathered his materials, a new determination settled in his chest, as solid and unwavering as his feelings for Emma. Richard Blackwood had made a critical mistake. He'd threatened someone Alex cared about. And if there was one thing Alex Conway had learned on his rise to success, it was how to identify an opponent's weakness and exploit it without mercy. It was time to find Richards. Conway Enterprises stands at a crossroads. The board chairman's voice echoed through the conference room. The Westfield merger represents the largest opportunity in our company's history, but it also presents the greatest risk. 14 pairs of eyes turned to Alex, waiting for the leadership they'd come to expect. 2 weeks had passed since Emma's transfer to the marketing department. 2 weeks of passing her in hallways with nothing but polite nods. 2 weeks of watching her from a distance, noting the increasing pallor of her skin, the tightening of her smile as her wedding date approached. "Alex?" the chairman prompted, concern etching his features. "Your thoughts on proceeding with Westfield?" Alex blinked, forcing his attention back to the matter at hand. The merger, $50 million in immediate profits, $100 million in projected annual revenue, the culmination of 3 years of careful positioning and negotiation. Everything he'd worked for since founding the company. And none of it mattered compared to the dark circles under Emma's eyes. "We proceed as planned," Alex said, straightening in his chair, "but with one adjustment. I want the signing ceremony moved up. Westfield is eager to close. We can leverage that eagerness to accelerate the timeline." The chairman frowned. "The due diligence team requested another month to—" "3 weeks," Alex cut in, his tone leaving no room for debate. "We close in 3 weeks or we walk away." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Alex had never been one to rush deals, always preferring meticulous preparation to speed. But something had changed in him. The board members exchanged glances, sensing the shift without understanding its cause. "Very well," the chairman conceded. 3 weeks it is. But Alex, this means you'll need to be fully engaged. No distractions. The slightest mistake could cost us everything." Alex met the older man's gaze evenly. "I understand. You have my complete commitment." It wasn't entirely a lie. From that moment, Alex divided himself in two. By day, he became the most focused, driven version of himself the company had ever seen. He worked 18-hour days, reviewing every contract clause, personally calling key Westfield executives, strategizing with legal until the early hours of the morning. The board watched in satisfaction as the merger preparations accelerated under his relentless attention. But by night, in the privacy of his penthouse, Alex pursued a different mission entirely. "What have you found?" he asked, accepting the thick folder from the private investigator seated across from him. The clock on his wall read 2:17 a.m., but sleep was a luxury he'd abandoned weeks ago. Marcus Kane, a former FBI agent with a reputation for discretion, leaned back in his chair. "Richard Blackwood presents an immaculate front, chief of oncology at 35, published in all the right journals, donations to all the right charities." The investigator's weathered face remained impassive. But dig deeper and the cracks start to show. Alex opened the folder, scanning the contents with growing intensity. Financial records, medical board complaints that had mysteriously disappeared, former patients who had received special treatment after their wealthy families made donations to Blackwood's Research Foundation. "It's elegant, really," Kane continued. "Nothing explicitly illegal on the surface. He recommends experimental treatments to wealthy patients, who then donate to his foundation out of gratitude. The foundation funds his research, which enhances his reputation and brings more wealthy patients." He shrugged. The ethical line is blurry at best, but he's careful to stay on the legal side of it. Alex felt a wave of disappointment. He'd hoped for something concrete, something he could use as leverage against Richard. So, there's nothing here that would help Emma's situation. Kane held up a finger. "I didn't say that." He pulled a separate, thinner folder from his briefcase. 2 years ago, Blackwood took over the care of a patient named Robert Parker. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, poor prognosis. Within months, Parker was showing remarkable improvement on an experimental protocol that Blackwood had exclusive access to. Alex's head snapped up. "Parker, Emma's father?" Kane nodded. Around the same time, Emma Parker broke off her engagement to her college boyfriend and began appearing at Blackwood's side at hospital functions. 6 months later, they announced their engagement. The timeline matched exactly what Alex had suspected. Richard had used his medical expertise as a weapon, dangling hope before a desperate daughter to secure himself the wife he wanted. "But here's where it gets interesting," Kane continued, pointing to a document in the folder. "The protocol Blackwood is using for Parker isn't exclusive at all. It was developed at Memorial Sloan Kettering 3 years ago. Several major cancer centers offer it now." His eyes met Alex's. Parker could receive the exact same treatment at a dozen different facilities. The realization hit Alex like a physical blow. Richard lied to Emma. He made her believe her father could only receive this treatment under his care. "Exactly." Kane's expression remained neutral, but a hint of disgust colored his tone. "Classic manipulation tactic. Create a problem, then position yourself as the only solution." Alex stood, pacing the length of his living room as new possibilities unfurled in his mind. If Emma knew her father had options, that Richard's threats were largely empty, would she still feel trapped? Would she find the courage to break free? "There's more," Kane said, interrupting Alex's thoughts. "The real dirt isn't in Blackwood's medical practice. It's in his foundation's finances." He tapped another document in the folder. "He's been using patient donations to fund a lavish lifestyle. Vacation homes, luxury cars, private jets, all disguised as research retreats or medical conferences. It's sophisticated insurance fraud, and he's been getting away with it for years." Alex stopped pacing, a cold smile spreading across his face. "That's it. That's our leverage." Kane raised an eyebrow. "I should warn you. Taking on someone like Blackwood is risky. He has powerful friends, connections throughout the medical community." "So do I," Alex replied, his resolve hardening. "And unlike Blackwood, I've earned mine through honest business, not manipulation and fear." He looked at the clock, calculating. "The Westfield signing is in 1 week. I need everything you found formatted into an irrefutable case by then." Kane gathered his materials, nodding. "And after that?" "What's your plan for approaching Ms. Parker with this information?" The question gave Alex pause. Emma had made her choice clear. She'd rejected his help, moved departments to avoid him, chosen her father's well-being over her own happiness. Forcing this information on her risked alienating her further, perhaps even pushing her more firmly toward Richard if she felt cornered. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I need to be prepared when the moment comes." After Kane left, Alex stood at his window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Somewhere out there, Emma was lying awake too, perhaps counting down the days until she surrendered her life to a man who saw her as nothing more than a prize to be won and controlled. But now Alex held information that could change everything, if only he could find the right way to share it with her. The next morning, Alex strode into the office with renewed purpose. The Westfield team had sent over the final contract revisions, and the legal department needed his sign-off before proceeding. He buried himself in work, reviewing each page with laser focus, determined not to let his nighttime investigation affect his daytime responsibilities. When lunch arrived, his secretary reminded him of the company-wide celebration planned for the marketing department's successful product launch. Under normal circumstances, Alex would have sent his congratulations via email, too busy with the merger to attend in person, but these weren't normal circumstances. The conference room buzzed with conversation as Alex entered. Employees clustered around a table laden with catered food, celebrating their success. And there, in the center of a small group, stood Emma. She was smiling, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, the first he'd seen in weeks. The sight of it struck him like a physical force, momentarily stealing his breath. Then she turned and saw him. The smile faltered, uncertainty flickering across her features before her professional mask slid into place. She excused herself from her colleagues and approached him, maintaining a careful distance. "Mr. Conway," she said formally, "we didn't expect you to join us, with the merger so close." The formality stung, but he matched her tone. "Ms. Parker, I wanted to personally congratulate your team on the successful launch." Emma nodded, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape routes. "Thank you. That means a lot to the team." She hesitated, then added, "How are the merger preparations going?" "On schedule." Alex studied her, noticing the way she kept twisting her engagement ring, a nervous habit she'd developed. "The signing is next Friday." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps concern. "Friday? That's the day before." She stopped abruptly. "Before?" Alex prompted, though he already knew the answer. Emma straightened, squaring her shoulders. "Before my wedding. The ceremony is on Saturday." The confirmation hit harder than Alex had expected, despite knowing it was coming. "Congratulations," he managed, the word tasting like ash on his tongue. "Thank you." Emma's voice was barely audible, her eyes fixed on some point beyond his shoulder. The ring twisted faster on her finger. Alex took a calculated risk. "Emma, if you ever need to talk about anything, my door is always open." Her eyes snapped to his, a mixture of emotions swirling in their depths. For a breathtaking moment he thought she might accept the lifeline he was offering. Then her phone chimed with a text notification. She glanced at the screen, and whatever openness had begun to form instantly vanished. "I should get back to my team," she said, already stepping away. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Conway." As she walked away, Alex caught a glimpse of her phone screen. A message from Richard. "Don't forget our dinner with the hospital board tonight. Wear the blue dress I bought you." Even from a distance, even in so small an interaction, Richard's control extended into every aspect of Emma's life, telling her what to wear, monitoring her whereabouts, counting down the days until his ownership of her would be complete. Alex returned to his office, a cold fury building in his chest. The investigation had confirmed what he already suspected. Richard was a fraud, a manipulator who had built his relationship with Emma on lies and fear. But knowing the truth and successfully freeing Emma from Richard's grip were two very different challenges. As Alex settled back into the merger documents, a new message appeared on his screen, an update from Kane. The final investigative report would be ready tomorrow, complete with documented evidence of Richard's insurance fraud and financial misdeeds. 1 week until the Westfield signing. 8 days until Emma's wedding. The clock was ticking on both fronts, and Alex couldn't help feeling that the two deadlines were on a collision course that would force him to choose between his company's future and Emma's. But as he reviewed the merger details with renewed determination, Alex made a silent promise to himself and to Emma. He wouldn't let her walk down the aisle to Richard, not when he now had the power to show her the truth, not when he could offer her father the exact same treatment without the emotional blackmail attached. All he needed was the right moment, the right approach to help her see that she had options beyond the prison Richard had constructed around her. Dawn broke over the city skyline, painting the clouds in shades of amber and gold. Alex stood at his office window, watching the world awaken while his own exhaustion dragged at him like an anchor. 3 days until the Westfield signing. 4 days until Emma surrendered her freedom to a man who had built their relationship on lies and manipulation. The complete file on Richard Blackwood sat on his desk, damning in its thoroughness. Kane had delivered it yesterday. Over 200 pages of evidence documenting years of insurance fraud, financial misappropriation, and patient manipulation. Enough to destroy Richard's career, possibly even send him to prison. But still, Alex hesitated. Emma had made her choice clear. She'd chosen her father's well-being over her own happiness, over any chance of a future with Alex. Who was he to override that decision, no matter how much he disagreed with it? His phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Final pre-signing meeting with Westfield executives in 30 minutes. Alex straightened his tie, locked the file in his desk drawer, and forced his mind to shift into business mode. The merger had to take priority today. Emma would have to wait, at least for a few more hours, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Alex was midway through the Westfield meeting when his secretary interrupted, her face unnaturally pale. "Mr. Conway, I'm sorry, but there's an urgent situation requiring your immediate attention." The Westfield CEO frowned. "Can't it wait?" "We're at a critical point here." Alex was about to agree when his secretary added, "It's regarding Ms. Parker, sir. She hasn't come in today, and HR just received a resignation letter by email." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Alex said, already rising from his chair. "My CFO will continue the review. This requires my personal attention." Minutes later, he was staring at Emma's resignation letter on his computer screen. The language was formal, detached, nothing like Emma's usual warm, precise communication style. It almost read as if someone else had written it for her. Alex tried calling her cell phone. No answer. He called 3 more times in rapid succession, each attempt meeting the same cold response of her voicemail. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. He was reaching for his jacket when his phone rang, an unknown number. He answered immediately, hope flaring that it might be Emma. "Alex Conway?" The female voice was unfamiliar, tense with urgency. "Speaking." "You don't know me. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm Emma's friend from college." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I'm calling because I'm worried about her. Really worried." Alex's grip tightened on the phone. "What's happened? Where is she?" "Richard moved up the wedding. It's happening tomorrow instead of Saturday." Sarah's voice cracked. "Emma called me late last night, crying. She said Richard found text messages on her phone, messages from her to me about you, about her feelings for you." The floor seemed to shift beneath Alex's feet. Emma had feelings for him. She'd admitted it to her friend, even while maintaining her professional distance at work. "Richard went ballistic," Sarah continued. "He accused her of planning to leave him, threatened to stop her father's treatments immediately. He's practically holding her prisoner at their condo, monitoring her every move. The only reason I can call you is because he took her to the hospital to see her father this morning. She made me promise to tell you what's happening." Alex was already moving, grabbing his keys and heading for the elevator. "Where's the wedding happening?" "St. Andrew's Cathedral, downtown. Tomorrow at noon." Sarah paused. Alex, there's something else you should know. Emma's father took a turn for the worse last week. Richard is using that to tighten his control, claiming only he can save him with some new experimental treatment. It's a lie, Alex said, his voice sharp with certainty. I have proof that everything Richard has told her about her father's treatment options is a manipulation. Then you need to show her before tomorrow, Sarah urged. She's giving up her whole life because she thinks it's the only way to save her father. Text me your address, Alex said, reaching the parking garage. I need to show you something first. I need your help to get through to Emma. As he slid into his car, Alex's phone pinged with another notification. The Westfield team, requesting his immediate return to the meeting. The merger hung in the balance, millions of dollars and years of work at stake. But as he stared at the message, Alex realized with perfect clarity that none of it mattered compared to what was happening to Emma right now. The company, the merger, his professional reputation, all of it paled beside the thought of Emma trapped in a marriage built on lies and manipulation. He texted his CFO, "Handle Westfield. Personal emergency. Trust your judgment on all decisions." Then he started the car and sped toward Sarah's address, the file on Richard Blackwood securely in his briefcase. Sarah turned out to be a petite woman with determined eyes and a fierce loyalty to her friend. She absorbed the information in Richard's file with growing outrage. "That manipulative bastard," she hissed, paging through the evidence. "Emma needs to see this immediately." "She won't answer my calls," Alex said, pacing the small apartment. "And if Richard is monitoring her phone—" "He is. He's installed some tracking app. Emma showed me last week." Sarah tapped her fingers against the file, thinking. Her father. We need to show this to her father first. Alex stopped pacing. Will he help? Does he understand what Richard is doing to his daughter? Sarah's expression softened. Robert Parker loves Emma more than anything in this world. He's been worried about this engagement from the beginning, but Emma convinced him it was what she wanted. She closed the file with determination. If he sees this evidence, understands that his treatment isn't dependent on Richard, he might be the only person who can get through to Emma now. Then we go to the hospital, Alex decided, right now. The drive to Blackwood Medical Center passed in tense silence. Alex rehearsed what he would say to Emma's father, a man he'd never met but whose well-being had become inextricably linked to his own future happiness. Would he listen? Would he believe the evidence against his own doctor, the man who'd been treating him for 2 years? They found Robert Parker's room on the oncology floor. Sarah entered first, greeting the thin man in the hospital bed with a familiar hug. Despite his obvious illness, Emma's father had the same warm eyes as his daughter, now widening in curiosity as Alex followed Sarah into the room. "Mr. Parker," Alex began, "my name is Alex Conway. I know exactly who you are," Robert interrupted, his voice weakened by illness but his gaze sharp with intelligence. "You're the man my daughter can't stop thinking about, even while she's wearing another man's ring." Alex faltered, unprepared for such directness. "Sir, Oh, don't look so surprised." Robert waved a frail hand impatiently. "Emma doesn't say it, but a father knows. The way her voice changes when she mentions you. The way she defends your company's decisions at dinner when Richard criticizes them." His expression turned somber. "She's throwing her life away for me, isn't she? Marrying that controlling peacock because of my treatment." "Yes," Alex admitted, "but there's something you need to know. Something both of you need to know." He opened his briefcase, removing the file. "The treatment you're receiving, it's not exclusive to Dr. Blackwood or this hospital. It's available at major cancer centers across the country." Robert's eyes narrowed. Richard said this protocol was his own development, that it wasn't available anywhere else. "He lied," Sarah interjected, her voice gentle but firm. "Alex has proof. And there's more. Evidence of fraud, of financial misdeeds through his foundation." As Robert examined the documentation, his face darkened with understanding and anger. That manipulative son of a... He stopped, looking up at Alex with new intensity. Emma doesn't know any of this. She doesn't, Alex confirmed. And now Richard has moved the wedding to tomorrow. I think he suspects she might be having doubts. Robert's frail hand clenched into a fist against the hospital blanket. Get my daughter in here. Right now. Before they could respond, the door opened. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes widening as she took in the unexpected gathering in her father's room. Behind her, Richard's voice echoed from down the hallway, talking to a nurse. Emma, Alex breathed, his heart seizing at the sight of her. She looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing her eyes, her skin pale with stress. What's going on here? Her gaze darted between Alex, Sarah, and the file open on her father's lap. Dad, what are they telling you? The truth, baby girl, Robert said, his voice stronger than it had been moments before. Come here, you need to see this too. Emma hesitated, glancing behind her at the sound of Richard's approaching footsteps. For one terrible moment, Alex thought she might flee, might choose the devil she knew over the uncertain freedom they were offering. Then her father extended his hand to her, and Emma made her choice. She slipped into the room, closing the door quietly behind her, and moved to her father's bedside. Dad, what's this about? She asked, her voice trembling. Robert took her hand, placing it on the open file. Richard has been lying to us, sweetheart. About everything. As Emma began to read, her expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to a dawning horror. She sank into the chair beside her father's bed, her hands shaking as she turned page after page. This can't be real, she whispered. The treatment. He said it was only available here. He said if we left... It's real, Emma, Alex said gently, keeping his distance despite every instinct urging him to go to her. I had it all verified by multiple sources. Your father can receive exactly the same protocol at any major cancer center. Richard has been using your father's illness to control you. Emma's eyes, filled with unshed tears, finally met his. Why? Why would you do all this? The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Why investigate Richard? Why risk his business focusing on her problems? Why care so much about a woman who had pushed him away? Before Alex could answer, the door swung open. Richard stood in the doorway, his handsome face contorted with rage as he surveyed the scene before him. What the hell is this? He demanded, his gaze locking on the file in Emma's hands. He lunged forward, trying to snatch it from her. Where did you get that? What lies has he been feeding you? Emma stood, backing away from his reaching hands, clutching the file to her chest. Is it true? She asked, her voice steadier than Alex had expected. Has the treatment been available elsewhere all this time? Have you been lying to keep me with you? Richard's face underwent a remarkable transformation, smoothing from rage to concerned professionalism in an instant. Emma, sweetheart, whatever Conway's told you, it's a manipulation. He's jealous, trying to sabotage what we have. He reached for her again, his tone placating. Your father needs consistency in his care. Changing doctors now would be disastrous. Stop lying to my daughter, Robert growled from the bed, struggling to sit up straighter. I've seen the evidence. You've used my illness to trap her, to control her. Richard's mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Robert, be reasonable. Who's been overseeing your care for 2 years? Who got you into this trial when no one else would? Your cancer would have killed you already if not for me. And I've been grateful, Robert replied, his voice strengthening with each word. But not at the cost of my daughter's happiness. Not at the cost of her freedom. Richard turned back to Emma, his expression hardening. You have a choice to make, right now. Stay with me, continue with our wedding plans, and your father's treatment proceeds as scheduled. Or listen to these lies, and I'll have no choice but to withdraw as his physician." The threat hung in the air, its cruel simplicity exactly the kind of manipulation Alex had expected. But what he hadn't expected was Emma's response. Instead of fear, instead of capitulation, Emma's spine straightened with newfound resolve. She opened the file again, turning to a specific page and holding it up for Richard to see. "Insurance fraud," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Misappropriation of foundation funds. False billing for treatments never administered." With each accusation, she turned to a new page of evidence. The medical board would be very interested in this documentation, as would the FBI. Richard's face drained of color. "You wouldn't dare. You destroy me. You destroy your father's chances." "That's where you're wrong," Alex interjected, stepping forward to stand beside Emma. "I've already arranged for Robert's transfer to Memorial Sloan Kettering. They've confirmed they can continue the exact same protocol without interruption. The arrangements are made. All Emma has to do is say the word." Richard's composure cracked entirely. "You can't do this. I own this hospital. I control who gets treatment here. I decide—" "You decide nothing anymore," Emma said, her voice quiet but filled with newfound power. "The wedding is off, Richard. I want you out of my life and out of my father's care, effective immediately." For a moment, Richard seemed ready to explode with rage. His hands clenched at his sides, his face contorting with fury. Then, abruptly, his expression changed to one of cold calculation. "Fine. Walk away. But remember what you're giving up." His gaze swept dismissively over Alex. "Do you really think he wants you for yourself? A man like Conway could have anyone. He's just enjoying the chase, the challenge of taking what belongs to me." Emma's chin lifted, the last traces of fear evaporating from her expression. "I don't belong to anyone. That's what you never understood." She turned to Alex, a silent question in her eyes. Alex stepped closer, careful not to crowd her in this moment of newfound freedom. "I've wanted you since high school, Emma Parker. Not as a possession, not as a prize, but as the remarkable woman you are." Richard made a disgusted sound. "Touching, really. But when Conway here gets bored and moves on to his next conquest, don't come crawling back." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Emma, have fun explaining to all our wedding guests why you chose your boss over your fiancé. I'm sure they won't think that's suspicious at all." After he stormed out, a profound silence fell over the hospital room. Emma stood motionless, the file still clutched in her hands, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she slipped the engagement ring from her finger and placed it on her father's bedside table. "I should have done that a long time ago," she whispered. Robert reached for his daughter's hand, squeezing it with what strength he had left. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I had no idea what he was doing, how he was using me to control you." "It's not your fault, Dad," Emma said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "I made my choices, too. I chose to believe him because it was easier than looking for another way." She turned to Alex, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, uncertainty, and something deeper that made his heart race. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," Alex said simply. "I didn't do this expecting anything in return. I did it because you deserve to be free, Emma. Whatever happens next is entirely your choice." The words hung between them, laden with possibility. Emma glanced at her father, who was watching them with unconcealed interest. "I think," Emma said slowly, "that I'd like to take some time, to figure out who I am without Richard's influence, to build a life that's truly my own." She met Alex's gaze directly. "And then, maybe, we could see where this leads, if you're willing to wait." It wasn't the fairy tale ending Alex had secretly hoped for. There would be no rushing into each other's arms, no immediate declarations of love conquering all obstacles. But as he looked at Emma, truly free for the first time since he'd reconnected with her, he realized this was better. This was real. "I've waited 10 years," he said softly. "I think I can wait a little longer." Sometimes the bravest choice isn't following your heart immediately, but finding the courage to heal yourself first. Love plants its deepest roots not in desperate passion, but in the fertile soil of mutual respect and personal freedom. True love doesn't demand sacrifice, it offers patience. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of love to break down walls and bridge any divide. Please do comment your feedback and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of family, redemption, and the triumph of love over pride. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.